We're the Western Institute for Social Research. My name is John Bilarowski. I'm the president and one of the faculty. We offer academic degrees that are personalized and emphasize social justice, action research, multiculturalism. Although we're based in Berkeley, all of our degrees are also available at a distance. We have 3-degree programs, a master's in education, community leadership, a master's in psychology that leads to the California State Marriage Family Therapy and LPCC licenses, and an interdisciplinary doctorate in higher education and social change. Our website is www.wisr.edu, and our presumptuous acronym is WISR, although we don't have an E in it with our initials. That's who we are. Uwe is one of our alumni. Uwe has become expert and recognized in the area that he's going to be talking about today. Our seminars are always open to the public.
Let me start by saying it's a pleasure to be here and having all of you from all over the place joining us on today's topic on exploring the cannabinoid health sciences. We're going to go through roughly about 30 slides covering a lot of topics that together comprise a significant complexity that's necessary to better understand and make some informed and discerning decisions about if cannabis is thought to work for a particular condition or not. Perhaps the best way to start is by saying that for the past 12 years or so that I've been doing research and writing in and about the cannabinoid health sciences, I've come to realize that the reason why cannabis works for so many different patient populations is because it affects the body and the mind in such a way so to fortify the body's capacity for self-healing. Fact is, the right type of cannabis given at the appropriate dose matched to each unique individual's needs will do so primarily in 2 ways. One, it will produce a deep sense of relaxation. And number 2, it will produce multiple system homeostasis at a cellular level. And so to begin to answer the question, how does cannabis works? It helps to go over a handful of concepts and terms that are part and parcel of understanding the lay of the land, if you will. The first term I wanted to introduce to you is the term endocannabinoid system. The cannabinoid health sciences are based on the principal understanding of the endocannabinoid system, which was only recently discovered in the late 80s. In fact, the first papers started to appear in the journals in the early 90s. And ever since that time, the insights gathered and understood by academia and by research have created quite a buzz in the research community, especially when it comes to chronic conditions for which orthodox medicine offers, at best in many cases, an ongoing regimen of managing with pharmaceutical medicines. So let's break down the term endocannabinoid system. The prefix endo simply means within. The center word is in reference to cannabis, of course. The suffix simply means to like or be similar. So if you string those translations together and read it backwards, it reads like cannabis within, which is a really good and apt description of what we're going to be looking at throughout these slides. The human body, in fact, all mammalian bodies make their own versions of cannabis or cannabis constituents, which, as it turns out, are essential to our health and well-being, and especially important, like I said a little bit earlier, for dealing with the underlying pathologies of a great number of chronic conditions. The basic building blocks of the endocannabinoid system can be concentrated or can be thought of as receptor sites and endocannabinoids, endocannabinoid receptor sites and endocannabinoids. It's estimated that an adult human body is comprised of roughly 30 trillion individual cells that are loosely organized into 11 organ systems. Embedded into the cell membranes of a large number of these individual cells that make up a grown body are receptor sites. And you can think of these receptor sites as locks or inside a door. And once a cannabinoid, you can think of them as keys, enters that receptor site. That lock engages, a door opens up, and very specific effects are realized. And the effects that are realized are not just physiologically, they also affect body, mind, and emotion. And so here's a visual representation, if you will, of to drive that metaphor home. Here on the left, you have all these kinds of different doors. You open up door number one and you realize, let's say, an anti-inflammatory effect. You open up number two, you realize a deep sense of relaxation. You open up door number three and it will affect your metabolism and your experience of hunger or the lack thereof. Think of the endocannabinoids as keys to a large variety of very specific effects. And the more you know about it, the more you learn about it, the more you are able to, with confidence, generate these precise effects that you're looking for, either recreationally or on your path towards optimal health. Let's look at two receptor sites that have been confirmed by science, and they're basically referred to as CB1 or CB2. The long term is endocannabinoid receptor 1 or endocannabinoid receptor 2. CB1 is primarily located in the central nervous system comprised of the brain and spinal cord. The CB2 receptor sites are primarily located in the periphery of the body, including a number of immune system relevant organs and cellular structures. CB1 receptor sites are virtually present in the entire architecture of the brain and the spinal cord. And so as such, engaging these types of locks allows you to modify sensory perception, mood, motor control, behavior. It has effects on memory, decision-making, and these are just a few of a long list of portions of the brain that is abundant in CB1 receptor sites. And by introducing cannabinoids, keys, we can then, of course, direct very specific effects. The CB2 receptor sites are mostly located in the peripheral nervous system. And of course, in cells of the immune system, such as the spleen, the tonsils, white blood cells contain large amounts of CB2 receptor sites. That's why engaging cannabinoid-based therapeutics works so well for anything having to do with inflammation, with oxidative stress, having to do with infection and overall immune responses. We'll get to specific conditions that relate to the activation of CB2 in a little while, but I just wanted to sort of like paint a bit of a map in terms of where CB1 and where CB2 receptor sites are located and are found. And so there are, in fact, 4 types or 4 classes of keys or cannabinoids. Endocannabinoids, those made by the human body itself, is one class. Phytocannabinoids or plant-based cannabinoids are primarily, limited to a single plant on this planet, which is, of course, cannabis. And then there's man-made cannabinoids and pharmaceutical version of cannabinoids. And we'll spend a few minutes looking at each of them and some of what they do, starting with endocannabinoids. To date, there have been 4 endocannabinoids that have been isolated, that have been discovered. The 2 most prominent ones are anandamide, which is named after the Sanskrit word for bliss, and which is also responsible for affectual changes that are observed in what's known as the runner's high. The other one is 2AG. And these 2 endocannabinoids are made by the human bodies. They are equivalents or analogs of cannabis, of 2 components that are, or a number of components that are part and parcel of the makeup of cannabis. And they bind to the same receptor sites, CB1 and CB2. Plant-based cannabinoids are significant in their abundance. There are few plants that contain such an abundance of biologically active compounds as cannabis. And of course, the 2 most studied phytocannabinoids, plant-based cannabinoids, are THC, famous for its psychoactivity, and CBD, which has gotten a lot of press lately. But you know, to date there are over 150 phytocannabinoids that have been isolated from the plant cannabis by itself. Now, each of these cannabinoids have their own unique profile in terms of what kind of effects they can generate. But the most important ones, and the ones we focus on today, are THC and CBD. In fact, THC has been shown to produce over 50 mechanisms that are relevant to a number of chronic conditions, and CBD has been found to approximate about the same number of mechanisms by which it is able to induce a number of very specific effects. Here's a brief list, and you can use the recording later to get a screen grab. But I just wanted you to get a sense of how far research has progressed. These are conditions for which research has progressed into clinical trials. So these are conditions for which there is evidence that cannabinoid-based therapeutics have either palliative or modulatory potentials, that is, potent therapeutic potential. These conditions are not in the preclinical phase anymore. These conditions have passed the threshold into clinical trials, and many of them have been examined in double-blind placebo-controlled trials. And for some of them, there are even now a meta-analysis of placebo-controlled trials, which is the gold standard to give us practical and actionable clinical information that allows us to fine-tune specific dosage points, what type of cannabis is considered optimal, and so forth. Now let's look at the same thing for CBD. And you see the list is similarly large, but when you actually put them side by side and you compare them, you'll find a lot of conditions for which both THC and CBD shows therapeutic potential, but you also find a lot of different ones. And that has to do with the fact that both THC and CBD, and of course, all other phytocannabinoids, have actually different pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics. And I'm sorry to throw those complicated terms at you, but you know, they serve to show you how cannabis really is a pharmacy in a plant. THC, so pharmacodynamics, is what the plant does to the body. There's specific effects it generates in very specific tissues, organ systems, or the whole body by itself. While pharmacokinetics is what the body does to the cannabinoid. In other words, how it's being absorbed, how it's being metabolized, how it is being eliminated. And so that is one of the reasons of why a single plant can be so effective for so many different patient populations and for so many different diseases. And so let's move on to synthetics. Synthetic cannabinoids, I like to call them the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you may have heard or seen newspaper reports about the use and the damage that synthetic cannabinoids have been done, because a lot of them are easily and readily available on the internet. And so, you know, the abuse potential or the adverse effects potential of using them without knowing, you know, the potential damage that they can do, you know, can have serious consequences, you know, including organ failure and consequent deaths. However, the good thing about synthetic cannabinoids is they are used significantly in a lot of academic research, and they provide us with a deeper understanding of how the endocannabinoid system, how the science of the endocannabinoid system is unfolding and how specifically it works. The next one, and the last group of keys or of cannabinoids are those that have already been patented by large pharmaceutical corporations. So on the left, you see a list of pharmaceutical grade preparations that are available by prescription here in the United States and in the European Union. And they're classified by chemotype, and we will learn about that a little bit from now. I just wanted you to sort of like get a sense that for the past 30 years, this research has progressed into opening the door into orthodox medicine and into pharmaceutical approach to health and healing. And any of these products or pharmaceutical drugs have been seriously vetted and therefore accepted by the powers that be, namely the FDA here in the United States. So now let's look a little bit at what is the evidence. We've looked at the basic building blocks in terms of how cannabis is thought to work, but what kind of evidence do we actually have? What's the evidence that's out there? One of my favorite repositories of information is, of course, PubMed, but there are a number of other ones. There's PubMed Central, and there is Cochrane, and there's a ResearchGate. So whatever your favorite doorway into a repository of scientific literature is, I'm using this as an example to just provide you with a bit of context of how far research has progressed and what the current speed of it is. When you punch in the word marijuana into PubMed, you get long list of links. In fact, you get over 35,000 trial results that break down. If you were to, last year alone in 2020, 3,723 individual studies have been published looking at components of cannabis or the endocannabinoid system in the treatment of very specific conditions. If you break it down further, it means that roughly about 10 new studies, if the trend continues, and in fact the trend is accelerating, 10 more studies on average are being published every day, providing us with new information and with new data in terms of how to optimize working with cannabis in the context of health, healing, and well-being. To date, we have clocked over 250 mostly chronic conditions for which cannabis or cannabinoid-based therapeutics show promise. In the backdrop of this slide, I tried to get the whole list in there, but I couldn't. So this is just a small list of conditions for which cannabis may produce the therapeutic effects. To me, the most important part is where it becomes practical. How can cannabis or cannabis-based medicine work for me or for those in my care? There are a number of steps that we can take to optimize the use of cannabis. In other words, we want to be able to achieve predictability of effects, and we want to stay away from that line, and we don't want to cross the line between a therapeutic effect and adverse effects, but which of course is part and parcel of educating oneself about the effects of cannabis. Step one starts by learning as much as we can about the data-driven science that points out which type of cannabis is posited to work best for what type of condition. However, the other thing that is fairly new to medicine, because a doctor will never ask you, well, what kind of experience would you like to have when I prescribe you a remedy or a drug or a treatment? When it comes to cannabis, because cannabis is such a multifaceted plant, and because the different types of cannabis lend themselves to producing very specific and very distinguished effects, it's actually reasonable and it's actually empowering to ask these questions. What kind of cannabis experience do you want to have? Do you need conscious sedation, for example? Or do you not want to be sedated? Do you actually open to having changes in cognition, or is that something you absolutely want to stay away from? We have choices, we have options. And in that sense, taking both the patient's preference and the data-driven evidence into account helps us to determine with what type of cannabis do we want to start. When it comes to discerning types of cannabis, one of the currently best methods of discerning The difference between the different types of cannabis is the chemotype distinction. Here are visual representations of the three different basic chemotypes, the basic different types of cannabis, which are defined by the amount of THC and the amount of CBD and the ratio to each other. To very basic and very simply point out the difference, a chemotype 1 contains more THC than CBD. A chemotype 2 contains relatively equal amounts of THC and CBD, and a chemotype 3 is more abundant in CBD than THC. And let's look a little bit at very specific conditions that light up in the scientific literature that says these are conditions that there's enough evidence to indicate a chemotype preference. And so for a chemotype 1, the one in the lower left corner, if you're dealing with spinal cord injuries, chronic pain, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, HIV-related anorexia or cachexia, or withdrawal symptoms from heroin or other more substantial drug addiction scenarios, a chemotype 1 clearly lights up for those patient populations. On top, a chemotype 2 lights up for multiple sclerosis, for primary and secondary symptoms of multiple sclerosis. And of course, the fibromyalgia patients tend to respond really well to a chemotype 2. And then a chemotype 3 here in the middle is very commonly used in alleviating a number of mood disorders, including anxiety and depression. It's beginning to significantly used in pediatric seizure disorders that are refractory to orthodox anti-seizure regimens. It's also helpful with inflammatory bowel conditions, and it has cardioprotective abilities, which makes it a potential novel candidate for a number of very specific cardiovascular diseases. The second step has to do with the sub-ratio of THC and CBD. The chemotypes basically just give you a raw distinction between more, equal, or less THC than CBD. Now, I like to use the basketball court analogy. When you play on the court, you play one-on-one. It's a very different scenario than if you play 1-on-2 or 1-on-5 or 1 on or against 100. And that is the idea of understanding the sub-ratio of working with cannabis chemotypes. The thing about THC and CBD, each produce their own abundant number of effects. Some of these effects that they're producing are actually mitigated. For example, CBD is able to mitigate some of the harsher effects of THC. Some effects are more pronounced with one or the other of these two cannabinoids. And in some cases, a combination of them produces a synergy. And so knowing about what does what allows you to tap into very specific sub-ratios. So for instance, some people really do well with 100-to-1 in order to cut out the shakes that are so common with alcohol withdrawal scenarios. A chemotype 2, which is roughly in the range between a 4-to-1 and a 1-to-4. So it's not just limited to a 1-to-1, a relative equal ratio, but so there is some play, there is some give and take. And of course, the chemotype 3 ratios then, range somewhere between 1-to-25 and 1-to-4. And so depending on your sensitivity to THC and depending on your specific needs, specific sub-ratios can become important. And so the good thing is most dispensaries that sell cannabis or cannabinoid-based products, especially in tinctures, most states require the manufacturers or the remedy producers to list the specific ratios before it goes out to sales in the dispensary. So it's fairly easy to keep track of these numbers. The next step to consider are actual dosing considerations. for example, when I take a cannabis tincture, I happen to be very sensitive to THC. A little bit of it goes a long way. And so these dosing considerations that are in these boxes are pulled from the currently available double-blind placebo-controlled trials that have been conducted so far. And so, when it comes to THC, the range of a dose that ought to be considered is very small, a microdose to a very high dose. And then when it comes to CBD, the dosing consideration from low to high are as what you see on that particular slide. When it comes to forms of cannabis, to date, there are a great number of different forms, some of which may speak to your preference or to a patient's preference, but others clearly speak to the very unique effects that are associated with each of the different types of forms. For instance, when you inhale either smoke or a vapor of cannabis, the effects are near instant. Within a minute or two, you are likely to experience an effect. It could be an analgesic effect. It could be that you feel relaxed. It could be that you're feeling changes in cognition. However, the effects only last for about an hour or two, depending on your particular situation. However, when you use a tincture or an edible, the onset, depending on if your stomach is full or empty stomach takes longer for the effects to set on, can take for up to 2 hours. So the onset is slower, but the duration of the effect is much longer. So if you're dealing with insomnia, for example, and you're looking to get a good night's sleep, a 2-hour duration of an effect may not serve you good enough. So an edible or an ingestible product that lasts longer, is most likely to be preferred by patients who are looking to deal with insomnia. Of course, there are a number of different other products, anything from metered inhalers to pharmaceutical grade injectables to suppository and topicals, including sublingual preparations that are very practical to use. Another step that I wanted to bring to your attention, and that is the potential to create an entourage, what's termed an entourage effect. And it's based on the fact that so many of the plant's constituents are working or can work together to maximize a specific effect. And so for this slide, I just picked the effect of looking to reduce chronic pain. There are a number of terpenes, and the list includes them. One of my favorite is beta-caryophyllene, which also happens to be a fully FDA-approved food additive that is readily available for purchase online, or if you have access to essential oil of copaiba or even essential oils of black pepper, which are rich in beta-caryophyllene, you can add those terpenes to your topical cannabis prescription to deal with the arthritis in the elbow or in the knee, to enhance and create a synergistic effect. In fact, when it comes to chronic pain, as you can see by the scales, but all 3 chemotypes, 1, 2, and 3, have shown efficacy in dealing with various chronic types of pains. But if you're doing it topically, you can add these terpenes and enhance the various effects that the cannabinoids by themselves would be producing. Now, the last step that allows you to fine-tune your specific cannabinoid-based remedy is called a session log. You can use this session log, do a screen grab, and use it if you want. And what it is, it's basically a summary of all the 5 steps, the 5 previous steps that I delineated. So first you note down what is the chemotype that you've been using. What was the sub ratio in the second row? Then what was the form that you've been using? The dosages is the 4th point, and then the entourage effects, potential plant constituents, and just look onto the remedies descriptions and test results, which give you the numbers. So you just plug in the numbers. what it is, and then you jot down after the experience is done what the experience was. In these lines there that are presented for you to jog in your notes. And then you make one adjustment at a time. You don't make two or three, because then it's really difficult to track, your progress. Sometimes you're lucky, and your first remedy, once you've done your homework and you looked at the available data, you checked your preferences, you decided, you made an informed decision, you started out with a particular product, and it turned out to be perfect. You found your remedy. Yay, fantastic. If not, if it actually produced an adverse effect, or if you weren't quite happy with the results, then you need to tweak it a little bit. And like I said, make one adjustment at a time, and you can use this review and adjust session log as a means to optimize your optimal plant constituents. I wanted to very briefly look at the adverse effects potential, which is typically THC dose dependent. For example, if you're using a chemotype 3 with very little THC, less than 0.3%, there is very little adverse effects potential. There's no addiction potential. And so it's one of the safest cannabis types that you can use. With the chemotype 2, when roughly a ratio between 4:1 and 1:4, for those like who are sensitive like me to THC, you want to begin to be more careful. But it's chemotype 2 is moderate, as far as the risks that are associated with it. And the highest risk potential we have with the cannabis chemotype 1, with the significant or almost exclusive THC content. And the most common adverse effects are, of course, red or dry eyes, or dry mucous membranes in your mouth, and the affectual changes, or the changes to your emotional state, can range depending on you and your cannabis-based product. Can range between, on one end it can be euphoric, and on the other end it can be dysphoric. And so in that sense, if you cross that line of between a therapeutic and an adverse effects, and you end up feeling anxious and increased anxiety, or end up even with a panic attack, then you definitely know that you need to dial down on THC. Other potential adverse effects include a slight increase in heart rate. And what's typically associated with an increase in heart rate is, let me start the other way around. When you take a cannabis product, one of the times you may realize an adverse effects is when there's a slight drop in blood pressure. And so you may feel a little dizzy, especially if you get up quickly. Associated with that drop in blood pressure is a slight increase, or typically a slight increase in heart rate, and which has been posited to be a compensatory mechanism because of the slight drop in blood pressure. In some cases, some patients have experienced an increase in blood pressure, which is typically associated with a state of a heightened anxiety, which again is associated with the THC abundance strains. And so keep in mind that adverse effects potential is in direct proportion to the amount of THC used, especially in folks like me who are very sensitive to THC. There are potential contraindications for the use of cannabis. And again, there are mostly THC dose dependent, and that includes patients with a family history of developing psychotic events, schizophrenia, patients with severe heart disease. The other thing is, you don't want to use a THC heavy strain before operating heavy machinery or before driving. And once more, most potential contraindication are THC related. Although when it comes to pregnancy, not enough trials have been conducted so far to get a better understanding of how other plant constituents affect a healthy and natural progression of pregnancy. addiction potential, very brief. It's very difficult to determine which drug tends to be the most addictive. A few respected academic organizations have attempted to establish some numeric value. The addiction potential is, of course, chemotype 1 related, so is THC dose dependent or concentration dependent, and about 9%, so out of 9 out of 100 people may develop cannabis addiction, and which interestingly can be addressed and treated with a cannabis chemotype 3. Now, to provide you a bit of backdrop in terms of what that means, and by giving you a bit of comparison, the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, in their report, made it clear that the addiction potential of cannabis is the same as the addiction potential of utilizing anxiolytics, pharmaceutical drugs that are used to treat anxiety. It is significantly less than tobacco, significantly less than alcohol, cocaine, and heroin. And this brings us to the last slide, where I wanted to highlight the concept of exit drug potential. The CDC estimated last year we had fatality rate in the United States of 70,000 people who died of drug overdoses. The vast majority of them were opioid and heroin related. That is an incredible number. And to give you a bit of context, in the entire Vietnam War, 58,000 US soldiers died during the duration of the war. The stadium here in Berkeley, the home of the Bears, has a capacity of 62,000 people. So the numbers are tragic. There are states in America where these numbers are still increasing. However, states that have implemented medical or recreational cannabis laws have actually seen a drop of up to 25% in opioid-related deaths. And if we were to extrapolate those numbers across the entire country, it would mean that over 17,000 individuals would have been saved by access to cannabis alone. And with that, I'd like to open up the conversation to a Q&A. If you're interested and want to learn more, here are 3 books that I inked on the topic. The one on the left focuses on opioids, using cannabis as a supplement for pain management. The Cannabis Health Index looks at all the conditions for which cannabis shows promise, with a special focus on mind-body medicine. And then the book on the right looks at the optimizing the CBD to THC ratio, basically the 6 steps. So if you want more information on that, you'll find that there. And I will make the books available for WISR, so when the time comes that you can visit the library, they'll be there available to you as well.
Can you touch on the problems associated with using pharmaceutical cannabinoids, please? In effect, rebound pain from withdrawal from nabilone?
Yeah, nabilone is a pharmaceutical version of THC. And so the question was rebound pain from withdrawal from nabilone. Okay, yes. So rebound pain simply means that you've taken a pharmaceutical, either a pharmaceutical painkiller or a pharmaceutical cannabinoid, and you had to stop it for whatever reason, and so the pain comes back. It's not been cured. So what you can do is you can switch to a cannabinoid-based product that contains significantly or only very small amounts of THC. So that would be a chemotype 3. Because CBD has shown efficacy with chronic pain, and there is no addiction potential, and you can create a synergy with other pharmaceutical pain regimens, and so in that sense it will provide you with additional options that will also, if there are other symptoms that are associated with nabilone withdrawal, then they actually might help mitigate that as well. So here's an interesting conundrum or apparent conundrum or a paradox where cannabis can produce potential addiction, but shifting to a cannabis a chemotype 3, which with no or very little THC can actually overcome or help you mitigate the very effects that the first chemotype helped produce in the first place.
Given the problems with binge drinking culture and associated health problems, it is amazing that all the products except CBD oil are illegal in the UK. Anyway, yes, I hope you guys in US upgrade OxyContin from Smarties status to a medication used only for serious and chronic pain, which cannot be treated by other analgesics or at least opiates with less addictive potential. Someone had to leave. Apologies, I have to go now. Thank you so much for this. May the sacred indigenous nature medicine, which is undeniably an environmental, economic, and social justice issue, be resolved as soon as possible. Can you talk about the drug-to-drug interactions with cannabis since it goes through the CYP450 pathway? Should this be a concern with patients both inhaling and digesting cannabis?
Yes, adverse effects potential ought to always be considered when you're utilizing a cannabinoid-based therapeutic in conjunction with a pharmaceutical. CYP450 and other enzymatic pathways, what that basically means is the body utilizes specific enzymes to metabolize, to break down either specific pharmaceuticals or specific cannabinoids. And so if the enzyme breaks down a cannabinoid, let's say like THC, then the bioavailability of the pharmaceutical that's conjointly used may become an issue in terms of producing stronger than normal effects. And the same can be true the other way around, that where the pharmaceutical loses its punch, if you will, because of the presence or the impact of cannabinoids on these enzymes that break them down. You know, there's a rule of thumb from clinical experience. When you're using less than 10 milligrams of THC in the context of co-administration pharmaceuticals, there is very little evidence that at that dosage range or lower, there will be an interaction. The same is true for CBD, except for a dosage range of up to 100 milligrams in conjunction with co-treating with pharmaceuticals. Rule of thumb, and I hope that helps a little bit answer that question.
Marilyn,
Next question is, what do you recommend for minimum THC effects from natural plants for improving mild ski knee pain during exercise? Which plant can I buy here in health food shops?
You know, I can't give you medical advice, but I can speak to the data that's out there. You definitely want to consider, you know, the different forms that are out there and your preferences about what kind of cannabis experience you wish to have. All three chemotypes tend to work for all types of chronic types of pain, including arthritis, elbow, knee, you know, any type of joint pains. So if you want to avoid changes in cognition, you can either try using a topical, you know, even if it includes THC, especially if you heat the oil. It tends to go in fairly deep and only produce localized effects. Or if you want to use a systemic approach, that is either inhaling or ingesting cannabis-based products, then you don't want to get changes in cognition, then use a tincture, a chemotype 3-based tinctures where there is no risk of getting high.
Okay.
Then Rosalind says, but not illegal in the UK is CBD oil without THC. I'm not sure, clarifying something else. Frank, how important is the strain of cannabis, i.e. sativa, indica, or hybrid in selecting therapeutic effects?
I'm glad you raised this question, Frank. That's an important one, and usually reserve a little time to discuss that in more detail. Using the sativa, indica, or hybrid distinctions are relevant terms that highlight a number of characteristics that distinguish different plant types, which is different from a chemotype-based approach. And so for growers and for breeders, sativa, indica, and hybrid distinction is very useful. But when it comes to determine the predictability of effects and to be able to create precise effects, these distinctions are very imprecise, and as such can lead to a stepping over that fine line between a therapeutic and adverse effects. Just because a sativa or a hybrid can still contain significant amounts of THC. the ratio between THC and CBD has nothing to do with sativa, indica, or hybrid. But it's those ratios, those qualities, those dosages or concentrations that you need in order to generate the very specific effects that you're looking for. And so with that in mind, if you want precision and predictability, you can't look at sativas and indicas. And I know in the past, before we had a lot of data and a lot of trials, a lot of people try to say, hey, use a sativa for an uplift and use an indica for if you want to relax or you want to down-regulate your nervous system. However, like I said, those things are THC and CBD dependent, not indica and sativa dependent.
Right.
And then Rosalind says, are there any interactions with other medication supplements for CBD oil without THC?
Yes, CBD interacts with a family of enzymes, just like we talked earlier, the CYP450. And so there are a number of medications that are affected by that. But like I said, if you're using less than 100 milligram of CBD, the interaction potential with most pharmaceutical drugs, is negligible. And that's based on, interviewing a lot of physicians and nurses who are prescribing cannabinoids alongside a number of other pharmaceuticals. And that was the consensus. As soon as new data comes up, we'll make sure to share that on our websites.
Okay, Uwe, can you tell people what your website is?
The website where you can get most relevant information and updated information is cannakeys.com, C-A-N-N-A keys, like KEYS.com, and you can go there and play with the materials and with the data that we compile on a regular basis.
All right. I think this is the next one, also from Elaine. I've been told that suppositories are effective for endometriosis and adenomyosis. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah. When you look at endometriosis, the studies that have been conducted, most of them for endometriosis are still in their preclinical stage. However, anecdotal reports from a lot of folks in that patient population have reported degrees of therapeutic effects of using vaginal suppositories to address symptoms of endometriosis. Absolutely.
Okay, and then Nick says, I found that edibles have less side effects than smoking and was more efficacious in terms of mental health for me. And then Gabriella's given us the website, cannakeys.com. And then Lisa, are there lists of strains which typically fall into each chemotype? Also, if someone is drug tested for their job, would a chemotype 3 with 1:25 ratio of THC to CBD be likely to show up on a drug test if used nightly for insomnia?
Yes, no, I think, that's two very good comments. The first one, are there lists of strains which typically fall into chemotypes? Yes, there are, and I have not memorized them, but I believe that we have a resource at cannakeys.com that has a table that says chemotype 1, 2, and 3, and then the common strain names, like anything from OG Kush to Trainwreck to the vernacular that's being used by most breeders, seed providers. So if you can't find it, email me there and I will forward you the file that has them. And you can find me on Uwe at cannakeys.com. I'm going to just punch it in. This is true for anybody here. If you guys have a question, just email me. Oh, yeah. You know what? I do not know. When it comes to test results and staying up on the latest, which cannabinoids show up in what drug tests, I'm not able to answer that. It's a good question. I would send you to normal, any website, norml.org, and they have a lot of information, a lot more information that has to do with policy and with testing, because we primarily focus on the medical aspects. Autoimmune arthritic diseases is one of the questions. Can I comment on that? Yeah, the state of science for autoimmune rheumatoid arthritis is in its clinical phase. And so there's a lot of data actually that can be learned from. And one of the key mechanisms or effects that both CBD and THC are able to induce news for that specific patient population is that it downregulates the body's immune response, which in rheumatoid arthritis is overly reactive, where the immune system attacks components of a skeletal system and as such producing these deformities in the joints and the pain, the heat, the inflammation in the joints. And so one of its primary target points, and that's not just through CB1 and CB2, but also through other cannabinoid sensitive receptor sites that are embedded in a specific in tissues related to the pathologies of rheumatoid arthritis. And so all three chemotypes have shown degrees of efficacy. And so yes, and that includes topicals. And here, one more time, a tip for using topicals. If you use a topical oil, no matter what it is, if you heat up the oil to slightly higher than body temperature, the effects that you get out of it is significantly larger than if you applying it at body temperature.
I have an autoimmune condition, so haven't tried a lot. But heating the body oil would be the oil would be one way, and then but I might email you about specifics later on.
Yeah, feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to discuss in person. Autoimmune with pain in the joints?
Yeah, it moves around. It's ankylosing spondylitis, moves around.
Oh, okay. Yeah, anything related to autoimmune is modulated significantly by CB2 receptor sites, and a number of cannabis constituents downregulate the overreactive immune response. And all three chemotypes, like I said before, with rheumatoid arthritis, have shown degrees of efficacy, but not so much. The state of the science for your particular autoimmune condition has not advanced as much as for rheumatoid arthritis. However, that does not mean that the insights that have been gathered in those other patient populations may not also be helpful to get a better understanding of how to move forward with, if you want to explore cannabinoid-based therapeutics for yours as well.
Thanks. Here's a new one from Nick. What are the mechanisms by which cannabis increases empathy and feelings of connectivity with others?
That's a very good question. One of my favorite areas of looking at or studying the endocannabinoid health sciences has to do with the overlap of two mind-body medicine and two orthodox medicine. There are a great number of neurotransmitters that are modulated either in part or significantly by cannabis plant constituents, and especially THC and CBD. Both modulate, for instance, serotonin. And serotonin is the molecule that's associated with happiness. It's associated with generosity. It's associated with intimacy, but then so is oxytocin, and so is anandamide. And so a number of other hormones or neurotransmitters that have emotional counterparts, if you will. And so in that sense, to answer your question, serotonin and oxytocin and to a degree dopamine are the feel-good chemicals that are modulated by those two prime cannabinoids. And that is one of the underlying mechanism that science has offered us to have a means to talk about of why that is.
Uwe, how long have you been researching cannabis?
About 12 years.
You seem to have a lot of excitement around it, and I sense that there's a lot of excitement in the group today.
Probably worth letting people know that you also did a lot of research on various sorts of herbal remedies and spices and that sort of thing.
I did a lot of research on the medicinal properties of spices, and I happen to like homeopathic approaches to health and healing, just because of the depth and sheer width of healing potential and all the areas that are affected by natural remedies such as herb spices or homeopathic remedies. I've also done a lot of work on treatment and prevention protocols in the area of malaria, and comparing and contrasting pharmaceutical approaches and environmental approaches and herbal and cannabinoid-based approaches. So that's a bit about the backdrop. I've published a couple other books on the topic, but you can just go and add to Amazon or Google it, and if you want to learn more about those as well. My medical background has been limited to doing pre-med in Germany and working for the city and county of San Francisco as a paramedic and firefighter for about 20 years.
You've also, over the years, been a very proficient documentary filmmaker. Have you made any films about this topic, or are you thinking about that? Or
thanks for now in the days of COVID and with Zoom and with click record, it's so easy to do something. And yes, I think I'm revisiting the idea of doing a relative short documentaries that sort of highlight a specific insight that has relevance to a specific patient population, and then make them available to for social media consumption, to just reach as many people as possible that could potentially benefit from a simple do or don't when it comes to working with cannabis.
There's another one from Larissa. Can you suggest other sites where we can find good data about cannabis?
It depends what kind of data you're looking for. If you're looking for hardcore data, go to ResearchGate, go to PubMed, go to Cochrane Library. And if you want policy data, we already mentioned NORML. There's also MAPS, MAPS. Those are my favorites that come to mind. I see a question about turmeric. And turmeric is one of my favorite spices. And it's actually been interesting to note that there is a connection between the endocannabinoid system and turmeric. Turmeric is one of those few plants that also have literally thousands of trials associated with the potential therapeutic effects of it. And I'm learning more and more about, how turmeric specific effects are also modulated in part by components of the endocannabinoid system. In fact, the new edition of the Cannabis Health Index will have an extended section on utilizing turmeric on par with other cannabis constituents to create synergistic effects, especially when it comes to pain, inflammation, oxidative stress, which are typically associated with any or most chronic conditions that patients are dealing with.
And I'd say, Uwe, also, I believe ginger is similar to turmeric.
Yes, that is true. But spices especially, and the reason why spices interact with the endocannabinoid system so much is because of, you may remember I've mentioned my favorite terpene, which is beta-caryophyllene. And beta-caryophyllene is especially abundant in a number of common kitchen spices, like black pepper. And beta-caryophyllene binds with CB2 and downregulates and modulates any inflammatory, infectious, or overreactive autoimmune responses. And so there's an overlap that is very exciting and very interesting.
I'll have to check that out. I know you're supposed to have black pepper with turmeric to make it more effective.
There you go.
But, there's another question, Gabriella. Are there any anti-cancer effects of cannabinoids or in combination with other anti-cancer plants?
That's a good question. I would love to spend time researching, but just because of the sheer depth and width of dealing with cannabinoids, I've not been able to do that. However, there are a number of trials that I've been following that highlights specific synergies of different cannabinoids and the acid forms and different terpenes and flavonoids that in conjunction create a synergistic effect, not just in palliative care scenario when it comes to dealing with all different types of cancers, but actually in the modulatory area of cancer research, which at this point is mostly in its preclinical phase. But the data is very exciting and it's very promising, and I feel confident to predict that within the next 5 to 10 years, we will have cannabis-based constituents, remedies that are able to produce apoptosis with a number of different cancers. Apoptosis meaning able to kill individual cancer cells. And by the way, Frank, thanks for pointing out, healer.com is another. It's Dustin Sulak. He's a DO who is very knowledgeable about cannabinoid-based therapeutics, and he has a lot of good material on his website, which is healer.com. HEALER.com.
There is another question. Where is your research published on herbals, turmeric, spices, etc.? Please, would that be Amazon as well?
You know, I just republished an older edition of a book that came out in 2008. It's called Spicy Healing, which has a section on turmeric, but it does not include any of the endocannabinoid data. The new edition of the Cannabis Health Index, which is due this summer, will have the most expanded and most recent section on the overlap of using cannabinoids or cannabis plant constituents in conjunction with turmeric.
Nick, so could you gift a copy to our PM and perhaps stream your next Zoom conference in the House of Commons?
Thanks, Nick.
So, Nick, where are you from? Where are you from again, Nick?
I think he's British, no?
Yeah, probably. Unless it's Canada.
UK?
It is UK. Right?
Yeah, great British humor. Thank you, Nick. I needed that.
I think the pace of change is glacial everywhere.
Thank you for the talk. This is Mel. Question would be, if I went to a cannabis store, which I haven't yet, how are they certified? The people that assist you, are they as knowledgeable as you are, or to some extent have been trained that I can ask some of these questions on the balances?
No, you know, this is a really good question. What is the educational background of people involved in the cannabinoid health sciences? And it ranges significantly from some people extremely informed to people who have cursory knowledge. On that spectrum, you also get a lot of misinformation and a lot of information that is actually wrong and not helpful and causing more problems than producing help. At this point, it's a bit hit and miss. Depends on where you go and who the purveyor is and what training they provide to their dispensing personnel. And so I mean, if you look at medical schools, for example, only 1 in 10 medical schools are even teaching the endocannabinoid system, although it's changing. We know we're getting more and more inquiries about engaging with universities and helping educate staff and student bodies in the insights, the actionable insights and clinical information that allows people to make more discerning and more informed decisions that will lead to producing optimal results and optimal prescription scenarios. But you know, it's right now it's hit and miss. It's pretty much luck. The good thing is more and more states are requiring labeling, for example, which is great progress. And so with some of what you learned here, you'll be able to take the data that's on the labels of the product that you're choosing and plug it into this session log, keep track of your experience, and become an expert in what ails you and what kind of specific effects you wish to realize.
Here are some responses from Debbie. I can answer. I work for a dispensary. It varies, but my company trains our patient care specialists extensively. I am on here too to learn more, and I work with patients. From Lisa, are there particular activities that raise levels of endocannabinoids?
That is a very, very interesting question. Let me answer it this way. When it comes to our health and well-being, a balanced endocannabinoid system is essential. Without it, we are susceptible to all kinds of developing kinds of conditions and chronic diseases. Let me give you an example of why that is the case. Researchers have bred animals without cannabinoid receptor sites, and they're finding that these animals are very vulnerable to contracting all kinds of chronic conditions. And so we know that at the basic level, components of the endocannabinoid system are what keeps us resilient, are what keeps us able to bounce back from the challenge of a disease, even if it's not one of a chronic nature. And so there are two concepts that highlight the area of concerns that you raised. And one concept is called endocannabinoid tone. And it's a new concept that's been explored in a number of studies. And endocannabinoid tone is extremely difficult to measure or to identify. And so endocannabinoid tone is, allow me to use another example that's more researched. There's another type of tone called sympathetic tone or parasympathetic tone, which is directly related to the upper effects in terms of increasing heart rates or the down reaction response induced by a parasympathetic response that slows down heart rates. The tone is very difficult to measure, but the effects, the increase or decrease in heart rate is what can be measured. And that is the same the way it is proposed in terms of understanding it, the way endocannabinoid tone works. If the tone is out of balance, we are more vulnerable to develop a condition or a chronic condition. If the tone is balanced, we can restore resilience, or we can be resilient in the face of challenges from pathogens or diseases. Now, the other concept is endocannabinoid deficiency. This has been established or has been proposed as a concept to highlight that when the body is chronically stressed for longer periods of time, the body's innate ability to make its own endocannabinoids that then bring about a balance in tone or a balance in endocannabinoid components, when it's diminished, when it can't keep up, then it's really difficult to reestablish balance. And so these two concepts, are at the core of what what Lisa's concern was. And the question was, can I raise my level of endocannabinoids naturally? Yes, there are a number of mind-body techniques, for example, that have been shown to facilitate and enhance the presence of anandamide and 2-AG. And chiefly among them are yoga, for example, various mindfulness techniques. Hypnosis has also been shown, the relaxation effects of hypnosis has been associated with an increase and balance of endocannabinoids. And so, but the same is also true for Tai Chi and other movement meditations. And so while we are pretty much in the early stages of learning how alternative methods or how mindfulness techniques in fact influence our endocannabinoid system, there are trends that are showing that this is the case. And a lot of the trials that look at neurotransmitters, hormones, or other communication molecules, like some of those we mentioned earlier, like oxytocin or dopamine or acetylcholine, for example, those are the ones that have very specific emotional correlates. And so doing or engaging in mind-body aspects that induce specific emotional states, for example, like a blissful state, enhances endocannabinoid tone and the presence of endocannabinoids. And like while the studies are early, the trends are clear and the trends are emerging. I'm looking forward to seeing more of those.
Frank says bud tenders are not a reliable source of cannabis information. Educate yourself before you visit a dispensary. Rosalind, am I saying this right? In Scotland, a young mother was prescribed medical cannabis as the first in a European project. I think I'm saying that right, maybe. And then Megan, I've heard about new DNA tests that analyze markers to provide personalized reports to help choose the right balance of CBD, THC, terpenes, et cetera. Does that sound correct?
Well, that isn't, Megan, that's an interesting new development. Yes. And I think to a point, I think there will be use for genetic testing that then highlights a specific strain as a way to match with the association of a proposed optimal effect. However, I believe that cannabinoid-based therapeutics will always be a process-oriented approach in order to optimize effects. And while a DNA test can be part and parcel of that, the sheer complexity of what's involved in utilizing a full spectrum cannabis product and the various effects they generate will continue to be very unique and individualized. And so yes, to a point, to answer your question, and no, because I believe it'll always require patient engagement and patient attention to detail when utilizing cannabinoid-based therapeutics.
And then Lisa, has taking phyto-cannabinoids been shown to lower levels of endocannabinoid production?
You know, that is a very good question. And I have not come across a study that made that clear to my understanding. I would love to know more about it. It could go either way, or it could be both, or a combination thereof. And most likely it'll be a chemotype differentiation that is likely to be applied along those lines. So not enough data to give you a precise answer. You know, cannabis is a plant that continues to engage my sense of mystery. You know, it's just amazing, the sheer complexity of a single plant and what it can bring to not just to health and healing, but to humanity in general. So it's just, I'm deeply grateful for just that, among many other things. But I do appreciate the sense of mystery it instills in me. And we have one more question about yoga and mindfulness.
Yeah, and we have two more. One from Gabriella. So Gabriella first said, are there policy movements around cannabinoids and social justice and law, as well as medical access?
A great question. Go to Normal. They are really good. They are really a good resource for anything associated with policy and facilitating access, not just in the United States, but globally.
Rosalind has, how does yoga and mindfulness meditation affect the cannabinoid receptors in the body?
Engaging in mindfulness techniques, in most different types, will induce a state of relaxation. And it's a two-way street. When we relax, the chemistry of our body changes, or when we change the chemistry of our body, it affects our mind. And there are some chemicals that induce relaxation, and there are some behaviors that induce relaxation. And it's a two-way street, and that's how it works.
Nick says, I just think you guys in the US are, very lucky to be able to purchase cannabis products, and now even psilocybin containing fungi in chops. I would argue that this is how it should be. Sounds like a blissful existence. Well, I would, before you comment, Uwe, I'd say there's a lot of things about living in the US that are far from blissful. But anyway.
It's not legal in all states, is it?
At 21, I believe it's Normal will give you a precise answer, but we're getting there. I think we're getting really close. And Nick, you're absolutely right. When it comes to pushing the edge or the envelope of anything to do alternative or innovative, the States is a good place to be. And when it comes to cannabinoid-based approaches or other psychotropic approaches like psilocybin, part of what drives it is not just the California consciousness, if you will, that is always interested in extraordinary experiences. But there's a lot of academic research being conducted on psilocybin as well, especially when it comes to dealing with end-of-life care and severe depression and other mood disorders. And so I expect these types of psychotropics to be soon available, similar to or akin to what's happening with cannabis. As it should be, I agree.
Sadia says, when farmers go legal with their growing, they are heavily taxed in a way that they are unable to continue. So most continue to grow under the radar. And then Rosalind says, medical cannabis available on the NHS in Scotland now. Uwe, you want to make any final remarks?
I would just say the one from Sadia, she's one of our faculty members, Sadia Paloma McCaleb, about the farmers going legal with growing and then are heavily taxed. Do you have any comment on that, Uwe? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, hemp, the use of hemp is, there's a whole vast ocean of beneficial information that is part and parcel of American history that we haven't even begun to talk about. Hemp can be used as a way to clean up soil. Hemp can be used in building materials, in textiles, replace plastic. The list goes on, and it's not my area of specialty. While I like the fact that the awareness of cannabis is also bringing awareness back to hemp, it also comes with a bit of luggage, especially in certain states, because of the taxation issues. For example, it's not easy. While growing hemp is easy, and while realizing the benefits of growing hemp is easy, the federal government or local governments are still making it difficult because of this horrific narrative on the war on drugs that has brainwashed so much of so many segments of our society. But luckily, it's changing. And I hope to see that these taxation efforts or burdens are lifted and turned around, where tax credits are giving for people who grow hemp.
Okay, well,
There's a few more comments.
another one. There's some Republican state. Go ahead, Marilyn. You read it. Go ahead.
Well, Cidios didn't commented that there's a great cannabis club near our school, WISR. It's in South Berkeley. And then JC, there are some Republican state reps who are now actually agreeing to legalize recreational MJ. Well, wonders never cease. We do have medical marijuana after many years of fighting for it. Sorry, Republicans in Pennsylvania. And Sudia says, when were you at New College? I was there for 15 years. I'm not sure who she's referring to. Who are you asking that to?
Yeah, Sudia, who was at WISR, not New College.
No, I got a BA from New College too.
Oh, you got a double BA. Okay.
Yeah.
He did his BA at New College and his master's and doctorate at WISR.
Yeah,
he did a bachelor's at WISR also, though.
Oh, double bachelor's.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Sudia. Nice to meet you again.
Hi. Have we met? Did we meet at New College?
It's been so long. I don't know.
Okay. I was the director.
We meet now. Good to meet you now.
Okay, you guys can reminisce later. Onward. So Uwe, this was great. Thank you so very much. Well, I want to thank everybody from not just the U.S., but from the United Kingdom and Scotland and Canada. And if I missed anywhere else, and throughout the U.S., New Jersey, Mississippi, Oregon, and others. Thanks for being here. So feel free to contact me at
Florida.
Feel free to contact me at mail@wisr.edu, or my direct email, johnb, as in boy, at wisr.edu. And if you send us emails, we'll make sure in a week or two to get the link to the video from today.
And also, if you come to WISR, you'll be 2 blocks away from a really good cannabis club.
Right. If you're near enough in Berkeley, that's right. Good point. Okay, everybody. Well, thanks so much. I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Take care.